Hey y'all, it's Miss Welch. Let's talk about cells, specifically the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. So we're going to talk about the components of that, starting with the phospholipids, and then proteins, cholesterol, and then this concept of selective permeability. Let's get started. Here's an image of a phospholipid. So starting with its class of organic molecules, you can know by its name, it's a lipid, right? It's a fat. And by its name, you also can guess that it has two parts. So the phospho part is this phosphate group at the top. We also say that's the head of the phospholipid. Here you can see POOO, that's the PO4 group here as the phosphate. And then the tails are at the bottom, and these are the lipid part. These are fatty acids. And so you can see there are two tails. One is saturated. Remember, a saturated lipid is one that has single carbon-carbon bonds. So each point here is a carbon atom, and then in between is a single bond. And so these are saturated with as many hydrogens as could possibly fit on the other bonds with those carbons. Now the other tail is unsaturated, and you see it has a double bond here between the carbons, at least one, and that means that it makes a kink in the actual three-dimensional structure of that fatty acid, and it'll have less hydrogens. That's why it's called unsaturated. We're going to talk about the arrangement of phospholipids as the major component of the cell membrane. But first, let's talk about Halloween. This is probably my least favorite holiday of all. I do not like to be scared. I don't watch scary movies. It is not my thing. So imagine you were going to take me with you on one of those scare mare events where you go in the haunted house and they terrify you through the whole building. Where would you put me in the group? I would suspect that if you had done this before, you would put me in the middle. If you put me in the beginning, right, then I'm terrified, I'm holding up the group, I'm trying to run and turn around, and it doesn't work very well. If you put me at the back, I'm gone. I'm out the back door before you have even got to the first room. So you put the scaredy cats in the middle and the bravest ones on the outsides, the ends of the group. And this is a good analogy for how we deal with phospholipids in the cell membrane. You may have noticed some of these terms in the earlier picture of a phospholipid. The tail is hydrophobic and the head is hydrophilic. So if you look at these drawings of phospholipids, then the tail, those fatty acids, are hydrophobic. And you probably could have guessed that because those are fatty acids, they're fats and water don't mix, right? Oil and water doesn't mix. They oppose each other, they're hydrophobic. Hydrophilic, that phosphate is an ion. It has a slight charge, and so charged particles are usually hydrophilic. They usually are water soluble for the most part. So if you look at these, or this arrangement, and this is the outside of our cell membrane, it's phospholipids in a bilayer. They actually turn one to the outside and one opposite so that those tails are in the center and the heads are on the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell. And that hides the hydrophobic tails from the large water quantity, right? We are made of a lot of water. There's a lot of water, both extracellular and intracellular in the body. So the hydrophobic tails that are insoluble in water hide in the center so they can be touching each other. And then the hydrophilic phosphate heads that don't mind, that like water and are water soluble, are on the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell, making those outer layers of the cell membrane. So I remember it like that Halloween idea, right? The hydrophilic, the ones that like to be scared, are on the outside, and you hide those hydrophobic or scaredy cats in the center. All right, let's look at a little more detailed image of the cell membrane. So we're just getting more complex as we go. You can still see these phospholipids. So they make a phospholipid bilayer. You see there's a whole sheet of them, and they are very mobile. They are not rigid. The one particular phospholipid could kind of meander around in this layer within it, kind of like people in a crowd, right? If you could see the tops of their heads. They could individually move, but you would still see a solid sheet of heads in the crowd. So they're very mobile within the layer. There are also big embedded molecules in the layer as well. And so most of these are proteins. And so we can look at some of the different subtypes. Two of these are directly related to how they fit inside the cell membrane. So this one is a peripheral membrane protein because it's on the edge, right? It does not go all the way through the layer. It's more on one side or the other. So it's on the periphery. It's peripheral. An integral spans the entire membrane. So you see part sticking out on this side and part on this side. So these are based on their structure, basically. Another type could be a glycoprotein, and this is one that has a sugar attached to carbohydrate. So this is some kind of carbohydrate chain attached. These can be receptors, identification for what kind of cell this is, or what its function is to other cells. If we scroll on the picture and see some other different types here, you can see a channel protein. So this is an integral protein, but very specifically, it has a channel coursing through the middle so that smaller molecules could pass through. This is very important for membrane transport. We sometimes want things from the outside to go into the cell or the other way around. And sometimes those are big, bulky molecules. They can't just sneak through. We need to have a method of getting them in and out. And these channels serve that purpose. Let's look at one more type of molecule that's in the cell membrane, and that is cholesterol. So we've zoomed in here. You can see cholesterol. It's really about the size of a phospholipid. It's not too much different in size, but there's not very many of them. Look, in this picture, you only see one right here, and that's relatively accurate. They are not as frequent as the phospholipids. You just see them randomly scattered here and there. It is 4 fused rings. And it is a lipid. So this is a specific type of lipid. It's a steroid lipid. And cholesterol is super important. I know everybody wants to say, have low cholesterol and, oh no, my cholesterol's high, etc. But you have to have some. Cholesterol is embedded in all your cell membranes, and it helps with structure. It keeps that phospholipid from being too wimpy. It's got to have some structure in there, and cholesterol fits that bill. So think about when we talk about hardening of arteries with your cholesterol, that they get too tough. Well, yeah, you've got too much and in the wrong place. You need a little bit to help with the rigidity of the cell membrane so it doesn't just fall apart into a puddle. So you have a few of them embedded. Now, cholesterol is only in animal cell membranes. So you don't find these in plants because plant cells have that extra cell wall around them that helps them be sturdy. So it is definitely only an animal-based molecule. You need cholesterol to make things like estrogen, and testosterone is a building block for some of those steroid hormones. So you don't want zero cholesterol. You don't want too high because you want it to stay in the right place and help your cells. You don't want it in your arteries or building plaques in other places of your body, but it is necessary. And we make it. It is not essential that you eat it because your body will make enough on its own. So looking at this cell membrane from a functional or physiological approach, we say the cell membrane is selectively permeable, or it has selective permeability, depending on how you say the sentence. That just means that the cell membrane is responsible for determining what goes in and out of the cell. All these different molecules will play a role in accepting certain molecules to go in or out of the cell, depending on active and passive transport mechanisms, the quantities, right, of molecules on each side, and the cell's specific needs and functions. So if you were going to describe a cell membrane in several different ways, we could talk about its structure. We could say it is a phospholipid bilayer with embedded proteins and cholesterol. We could talk about it functionally as being selectively permeable. We also sometimes say it is a fluid mosaic model. So mosaic, right, means that there's lots of different parts, like a flower mosaic or ceramic mosaic, where they've used all the little bits and pieces to make a picture. So there's lots of parts, but it is very fluid. All these things can kind of move around within the layer as needed. So those are probably some of the terminologies that you will hear when discussing a cell or plasma membrane. All right, that's all for the cell membrane for now. Thanks for watching.